expensive.
Well,
I expect us
I'm
to see a
pro.
lot more on this in the next few years.
So yes, I do, and I love looking at the studies. But let's take it one step further. As we look at all of this, it's going back to like the TCM way of thinking, or indigenous curandero way of thinking, right? And there is not one pattern for everybody. It is very individual because of their genetic code, because of whatever species and foods. And this does go back to the one pill concept, why one pill doesn't work. Because right now we have somewhere, depending on what you read, between 7,000, 10,000 identified species living in different human microbiomes at this point. They all have different ideal feed uh, particles. And it's not always straight from food. Of course, you have a first line. It's a combination of our own enzymes, our own gut motility, and everything else. And this is why it kind of astounds me that some people are still looking for one fiber solutions. When we already know there's so much complexity, we really have to look at biodiversity even in foods and supplements or spices that we ingest in order to have that health factor, right? So,
The funny thing is when we talk about polyphenols and different things that improve the gut, well, all this stuff came from food anyway. And so, the fruits and the vegetables, and the fermented foods and the yogurts and all these things, it's like, well, here we are, reductionist approach of, isolating the one lactobacillus when in fact it's like, well, traditionally these things helped us, immensely just on their own from food.
Well, I
and
mean, let's pick up on one particular news item in the past 14 days, and that is just to exactly say what both of you were saying. The taste of chocolate and the refined beauty that is in high quality chocolate comes from what? The microbiome of the cocoa pod,
and the
the fermentation process and everything. And now we're starting to see that this is very interesting now. The very flavor of chocolate is influenced by a competent microbiome of the cocoa.
Yep.
And from the
It's
ground, seeping from the ground around it, it's getting in the cocoa
Yes,
pod. And
it's
so it's not even
everything.
like
So
it's
this
not.
is actually called something. So when you look in the literature, it's called the edible microbiome. It shows up in the literature around 2022 as a phrase, and showing that there are bacteria living on the surface of leaves and inside the plant. So when you're eating locally grown lettuce from somebody who doesn't spray their crops, blah, 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 but they're raising it in a regenerative manner, you are getting not only an exceptionally nutrient-rich leaf, you are getting transient microbiome every time you eat one of those leaves that informs you about the environment you live in and fortifies your gut guild.
that is what the Quechua told me in their philosophy that I didn't completely understand around 2007 to 2009 when I was traveling in Peru. And I'm talking out, it was a friend of mine that drove us in the back hills or mountains of Peru, between Cusco, the city, and Urubamba Valley, which is the Fertile Valley region. And the reason it came up was because I questioned, why is there this brand new, it was a sparkling white chemical or processing plant in the middle of nowhere on the way to Urubamba Valley. And I said, oh my gosh, that must be providing a lot of jobs. He said, oh no, they closed it. I said, what do you mean they closed it? He said, oh, they built it about 2 years ago, but then it was supposed to be fertilizer, and all the elders rejected the fertilizer when they were given free samples within the first few months. And they sent everything back to them and said, no, take this away. The soil is going to get addicted to this, and eventually the life in the soil will die and it will blow away.
Well, it should come as no surprise that one of the phrases that indigenous populations around the world use, and I'll use the English version because I don't know the other ones, is the land with the capital L. And what's interesting is we didn't really understand what that meant until very recently. And here's the very recent thing. 6 months ago, a study came out showing that 99.9% of all biodiversity on Earth, let me say that again, just the magnitude of this. 99.9% of all biodiversity on Earth is found in the soil, which means macrofauna, elephants, whales, insects, I don't care what they are, is 0.1% of the biodiversity on Earth. And we're really killing the land in the way that we commercially produce food, and it has to change.
It's
Well, and when we talk about microorganisms, we don't pay attention to them because they're too small to see.
Hmm.
Whereas, it's easy for us to pay attention to things we can see. But
yet
yeah,
Greek
but it's crazy. It's like,
the
go
Greek
ahead.
identified in invisible creatures where the root word comes from. The indigenous in Peru told me there were invisible creatures that work on Pachamama's behalf, and it's not just the soil, and it's not just how we farm. We are not putting input back in. They said their viral resistance or resilience for evolutionary reasons, generation to generation, is the cycle that matters. What we put out, what we intake. And they said seasonal intake of food is critical because every season the invisible creatures are given instructions based on our output by Pachamama of what to put in as new medicine. And if we don't partake of that seasonal cycle, that we will be forgotten and erased.
Yeah, and
Well,
these are some of the lessons of many cultures who have been lived for thousands of years. And so, yeah, we've erased all this traditional ecological and economic knowledge by westernizing people who have lived sustainably for many years. And here we are, you know, being extractive and trying to maximize our yield out of an acre and all those
yeah,
things. It's like, well, that's just a relatively new approach, in the past 100 years or so.
So anyway, let's stop at this topic for now. We'll continue in a second.
there is no one solution. We all come from ecosystems that are dependent upon other ecosystems. We are an ecosystem. We live in an ecosystem. We have ecosystems living inside of us. So we're a three-nested ecosystem. So to have the hubris to say that there is one solution is so incredibly ignorant. And I mean that in a very nice way. I just think people don't know that they don't know. But now is the time to understand that we need to reinvigorate our understanding of all the players, and we need to play nice with those players because we're all in this together, and that's all the organisms in
And
the
that's
ecosystem.
comprehensive, and
Planetary,
that is also consequence.
right? No linear solution. Stop buying that.
Before we
We
wrap
grow
up,
up knowing the world is a complicated place, but then here we are trying to simplify it into these sound bites, and
This makes
that's
it
how we
easy.
can,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
oh, of course it makes
Soundbite
sense,
medicine.
because then we can translate it into binary code. We can
Mm.
make a word for it. But remember, the first principle of science originally was to observe and gain gnosis and name that which is not named. We're far from that. In the last 500 years of science, we went into the mode of Frankenstein,
Well,
wanting
it's Galileo reductionism and materialism. That's the problem.
So we're going to wrap up with one thing, though. What's your hot topic that you read or you theorize for a future outlook? Blake, go.
What do numbers mean? So when somebody gives you a number, whether it's a nutrition number, what are the methods used to produce those numbers? How do we validate those numbers? So yeah, and I posted on this yesterday, is when somebody says that what they think is a fact, well, what numbers are they based on? Who published those numbers? So it's kind of an exercise in what we talk about a lot, which is, the research aspect of understanding fact versus fiction, because it's so hard nowadays. And so, because I've been part of analytical validations for, different food components, there's actually a process to it that is very scientific. And when people say, hey, we have this junk in our foods, well, no, we can actually measure this stuff and there's data on it at this point. And so it helps to inform, rational conversations around, well, food contaminants and, everything we can think about that we can analyze based on chemistry.
And Dave, your hot topic?
Yeah. So my hot topic right now is what I've been doing for the last year, this nutritional criminology. So how does nutrition influence criminality, aggression, recidivism to crime, which means returning to crime, and also comorbid outcomes in long-term incarceration versus the normal population. And then the layer of adverse childhood experiences on brain architecture as it applies to then the nutrition that you get while you're incarcerated. And then we're hoping that this information will inform us about other things where, like schools and hospitals and stuff like that, about the mental health brain architecture link and behavior. So that's a hot topic. It's called the legalome. So it's omics plus the microbiome, but as applies to behavior.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah. And I do know, what was it? Early early 2000s or
Like, you
maybe
mean
around 2000.
Schoenthaler's? There's only really one real researcher in the US that predates 2017, and that's Schoenthaler.
No,
So
it's
he did a lot of the research on B vitamins and stuff in cars.
actually thinking about the UK study in the schools about the
Oh yeah, okay.
rejection of and it was, I believe it was at the time, it was Prince Charles' push to
Mm.
support its organic agriculture, regenerative agriculture type of
I
thing.
think Jamie Oliver was involved in that in the UK as well too. So a lot of school.
Him to walk into their Section 8 school district and see what would happen if
Mm.
nutrition was changed and all of the behavior changed in the children,
Yeah.
which
This happens a lot. I mean, the big study that people talk about is the change in orange drink versus orange juice in an adolescent setting, where they were in, juvenile detention, area, and they decreased aggression by 47%, literally just by adding real orange juice.
wow.
So,
That's
there's another one with B vitamin supplementation. Aggression comes down by 30%. So when you could look at the stacking effects, you can't add those percentages. It doesn't work like that. But you get a stacking effect where that 47% plus supplementation. So orange juice plus supplementation will get you numbers now over 50, and then it slowly creeps up to a plateau. So it starts to plateau. It's a logarithm after.
It makes total sense when you think about how diet relates to chronic inflammation in
That
your
makes sense
brain.
when you
Yeah.
feed your kids bad food and they end up running all over the place and doing all this crazy stuff versus when they've had a good solid meal. You see it there. Well, I mean,
Well,
adults do the
you
same
say
thing.
if you say fiber and protein are two things you really need as part of any meal, then okay, well, where are those coming from? And obviously then you get into thoughts about cost and all that type of stuff. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that there's no consideration to what are the two most important macros in much of our institutional,
Sure.
diets. They're working within cost constraints and everything. But yeah, I agree that needs to change.
definitely. So anyway, I'm going to add as my hot topic, I'm going to look at this very generalist view. And so for many, many years, I've been saying that I think all sciences are eventually going to fall under some sort of a physics umbrella because everything is about shape, lock, and key, and the interaction to keep kinetic motion going. That is the continuum of life, whether it's the universal scale or the smaller scale. And it's my hope that eventually science is unified enough across the disciplines to actually speak the same language so the data turns into a truth rather than a constant argument of simplistic facts that causes more chaos. But anyway, we will wrap up this session and be back shortly.